afternoon. Welcome to the Full Scottish here on Broadcasting Scotland on Sunday the 9th of September. I'm joined today by, Sunday the 3rd of September. The voice in my ears already right at the start of the show. I'm joined today by two guests. We have Morag Williamson. Morag, welcome to the show for the first time, and we have Martyn Day. Morag is the founder of Yes for EU and was a co-organiser of yesterday's march for independence within the EU yesterday in Edinburgh. And Martyn Day is the SNP MP for Linlithgow and East Falkirk. Martyn has been an MP continuously since the 7th of May 2015, and he currently undertakes the role of Shadow SNP spokesperson for health and social care. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Great to be here.
Thank you for taking time out to us. So I'll start with our regular update on the war in Ukraine, day 557. Ukrainian forces have decisively breached Russia's first defensive line near Zaporizhzhia after weeks of painstaking mine clearance, and expect faster gains as they press the weaker second line, according to Brigadier General Alexander Tarnavsky, who is leading the southern counter-offensive. He estimated Russia had devoted 60% of its time and resources into building the first defensive line, and only 20% each into the second and third lines because Moscow had not expected Ukrainian forces to get through. Ukrainian forces were on the move, President Volodymyr Zelensky said, as the US acknowledged the notable progress of the counter-offensive over the past few days. On Saturday, a Ukrainian court ordered tycoon Ihor Kolomoisky to be held in custody for the 2 months on suspicion of fraud and money laundering. The Nobel Foundation has reversed its decision to invite ambassadors from Russia and Belarus to this year's Nobel Award ceremony in Stockholm after the move sparked anger in Sweden and abroad. The Russian Defense Ministry has claimed to have taken down 3 Ukrainian drones over the Belgorod region. On Saturday, President Zelensky said that 2 more ships had passed through the temporary Black Sea shipping corridor established after Russia withdrew from a UN-backed grain export deal in July. On Friday, officials said 2 vessels had cleared the corridor, bringing to 4 the number that have used it. Russia risks dividing its forces in trying to prevent a Ukrainian breakthrough in Ukraine's south, the UK Ministry of Defence said. It said Ukrainian forces continue to take offensive action on the Orkiv axis in southern Ukraine, with units reaching the first Russian main defensive line. Vladimir Putin is to host his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, for talks on Monday, just over 6 weeks after Moscow broke the UN deal that allowed grain exports from Ukrainian ports. Russia's defense ministry said its forces destroyed an unmanned Ukrainian boat being used in an attempt to attack the bridge linking the Crimean Peninsula to the Russian mainland. Elections are underway in Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine as Moscow attempts to exert its authority in the occupied parts of the Ukrainian regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. The largest refugee centre established to home Ukrainians fleeing the Russian invasion has been closed by Poland after it said the sanctuary was no longer required, since most had now found homes elsewhere. So that was our final Ukrainian update there. Morag, can I come to you first maybe and ask, was there anything in that update that caught your eye?
Well, in the update about Ukraine, obviously most of us are keeping our eyes on it to hopefully see the end of the war as soon as possible. I mean, at the moment, it looks as though Ukraine is perhaps maintaining the upper hand, but it's still looking really quite uncertain. And the recent events in Russia, whereby it appears that that one of the main opposing figures to Putin, it appears that he's been assassinated. That suggests, real instability within Russia, which, if that instability increases, then that might bode well for for Ukraine gaining ground in the war. However, it's still very touch and go, I think.
Touch and go is a good way to describe it, I would say. Martyn, what about yourself?
I don't think there's much I can add. It's a very sorry situation. I think the thing that was most shocking in the update you gave us there is, if I picked it up correctly, 557 days. It just seems to be going on forever, and until there's a peaceful solution, it will continue to go on, and let's just hope we get a resolution in short order, because there's been too much pain and suffering already.
Thank you, Martyn. So the first item we have for this week is the Brexit border checks. So this week the UK government delayed the implementation of post-Brexit checks for food, plant and animal products for the fifth time, and they've pushed it back, what's called the target operating model, otherwise known as TOM, until January next year. And then recently, of course, we had James Cleverly went to China to try and plug the gap in the trade that's been lost since we have left the EU. Martyn, I'll come to you first. Do you think, can the UK recover the trade imbalance that it lost when it left the EU?
Well, I mean, in the long run, probably it can, but it's going to take years to replace the damage that's been done, if it can be done at all. So I'm a bit pessimistic about that. I mean, I'm not surprised that they've delayed the implementation of TOM yet again. We know that with food inflation running at about 15% in the UK compared to where it was last year, anything that would add to that would put yet another burden on hard-pressed families. And of course, it's the bureaucratic delays that impact businesses and the disproportionate hit that it has on smaller importers that is very concerning. So will they ever get round to actually implementing it? And of course, we've got to remember that in Scotland, we actually produce more food than we consume. We export a lot of it, so these things cut both ways. So, our businesses are being affected in two different directions. So we need to get a situation where we benefit ourselves, and we've also got to improve the quality of food we're eating, which is maybe just me shoehorning another issue in, but we know that the UK has the worst record for consuming ultra-processed foods in Europe, and Scotland is one of the worst parts of the UK in that respect. So we need to be looking at things and improving our diet, and perhaps consuming more of the high-quality produce we produce here in Scotland would be one way around that.
Thanks, Martyn. You said that Scotland produces more food than it needs. The same is also true, isn't it, of energy, renewable energy as well.
Energy and water, and we could add in that we export more than we import. We are in a very strong economic position when you look at all these factors.
Thank you. And Morag, the fact that James Cleverly did go to China recently, hoping to come back with something that would help plug the gap that was lost when Britain left the EU. Do you think, is China the kind of country that Britain should be going to? And would you say that it did look as if he was going cap in hand when you look at China's record for things like human rights?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, isn't it? On the one hand, yes, China does. It looks very dodgy in terms of human rights, and was this raised behind the scenes by James Cleverly? I think he claimed to raise it, but we have no idea how assertive he might be on trying to get China to improve its human rights record. I mean, we don't have much leverage now, do we? In the UK, UK has isolated itself from the global stage, from the big players, really. So it's hard to imagine what leverage we have now with countries like China. As far as actually getting trade agreements going, well, if he can get an agreement with China, fine. But the thing is that this was well known for all those years before Brexit happened, between 2016 and 2020. For all those years, there were people warning this is exactly what would happen, that our trade would suffer in just the way that Martyn has described, and Scotland being affected disproportionately as well in both directions, exports, imports. We knew all this before Brexit happened, and I mean, I was campaigning, with a grassroots group against Brexit, But it wasn't just the grassroots groups, it was every single expert, economics, trade expert, you name them. They were saying this is a bad idea. Okay, but that was just, that, as we know, it was just ignored by the UK government. So now we're in a situation where the UK government is scrabbling to try and get trade deals, and they had a big announcement about New Zealand trade deal recently, which will replace, I think, about 0.08% of the kind of trade revenue we had before. So it comes down to basic geography. Actually, it is rather easier and more sensible to have really good full trading arrangements with your closest geographical neighbours, and which is what we had in our membership of the EU. It was some UK government ministers found it hard to understand how much trade there came via Dover Calais, if you remember that. I can't even remember the name of that UK government minister.
It's Dominic Raab. Dominic Raab.
Which is ridiculous. So Brexit has really damaged our trading arrangements. I don't know how you can recover it other than the UK rejoining the EU, and I don't see them doing that anytime soon.
Thank you, Morag. And staying with you as the founder of Yes for EU, can you maybe say something about that organisation and maybe tell us a little bit about who you've been talking to, what kind of conversations you've been having, and any kind of what feedback you've been getting from the EU?
Well, I was one of a small group of us who founded Yes for EU back in early 2020, and we had been a grassroots group campaigning against Brexit, as I mentioned. And when it was after the 2019 general election, December, when it became clear that Brexit wasn't going to happen, that was when a lot of us got together. Many of us were in favour of independence anyway. We had been focusing on trying to stop Brexit. But anyway, we got together and we thought, right, okay, this is absolutely clear. Loads of other benefits with independence anyway. And now this key factor affecting us as a country, this Brexit, being dragged out against our will, and that's the other thing that rankles, the total denial of democracy. Anyway, we got together, and that coincided with the start of the pandemic, funnily enough. Not funny at all, actually. That was March 2020. Anyway, we kept campaigning throughout the pandemic, complying with the restrictions. We had stalls and everything, but we always complied with the COVID restrictions. And so we kept going, and we've kind of gradually built up really good relationships with other groups in the Yes movement. We're not actually a national group, although most of us are actually. Most of the campaigning is based in Edinburgh because that's where we happen to be. But anyway, we do have members all across Scotland and beyond. So we're very into collaboration. So there are 2 or 3 local groups in Edinburgh and Lothians, notably Yes, Marchmont and Morningside, and also Yes, Musselburgh, and Pensioners for Independence and the Women for Independence in Edinburgh. We collaborate regularly with local groups and also within the region. Sorry, you have to stop me. I can't remember what else you asked me about. Sorry, Brian.
No, that's fine. It was exactly. We'll be coming back to your organisation later in the show anyway. So no, thank you for that. Mark, no, I think we'll move on to the next item if that's okay. Once again, responding to reports that the ECHR, that's the European Court for Human Rights, could back sending asylum seekers to Rwanda, Suella Braverman hinted that the UK government would look to withdrawing from the ECHR. I'm sorry, I think I've misread something. I need my reading glasses. I'm getting old. So once again, responding to reports that the ECHR could block sending asylum seekers to Rwanda, Suella Braverman hinted that the UK government would look to withdrawing from the ECHR. This week we learned that the laws protecting equal pay for women was scrapped in the retained EU law bill. So this, I'm really pleased to say, gives me yet another opportunity to remind viewers of Rishi Sunak's 5 priorities. Excellent. So, which were to halve inflation, to grow the economy, to reduce the national debt, to cut waiting lists, NHS waiting lists, and to stop the boats. So that's good to know that there is a plan. And there's been a report by an organisation called The Bottom Line, which says that Labour and the Conservatives have been accused of being out of step. Oh, sorry, I've gone on to the wrong. So I'm really sorry, folks. I've gone on to the next item again. So I'm going to go back to Suella Braverman and asylum seekers. So, Martyn, I'll just look to you maybe to get me out of the hole that I've dug for myself once again. What's your response?
Well, I wouldn't worry about the hole. It's a much bigger hole that the Tories are digging for everybody else. I mean, the whole Rwandan policy is just utterly inhumane, and I think probably illegal, which is why they're obviously looking at trying to get out of the ECHR, which in itself makes absolutely no sense, because if you look at the ECHR, it came in the 1950s. It predates the whole European Union Brexit debate, and it's all basic things that you would support. I mean, it's literally, to use the expression, motherhood and apple pie stuff. I mean, it's about your rights to life, against torture, against slavery, and I mean, what's not to like about it? It would be crazy for them to move away from that. But of course, that is where they are now. They're on right-wing crusades and culture wars, and it's summed up by their Deputy Party Leader Lee Anderson with his F off back to France style comment. It's this xenophobic nutjobs that have taken over the Tory party and are now running the country. So that's the context that it's in. It's completely bonkers and should just be consigned to the dustbin.
Thank you, Martyn. And Morag, that thing about women's rights, equal pay for women, that's been scrapped in the retained EU law bill, isn't that despite? Remind me if I'm correct that this is despite the fact that the EU would be protecting that right or that law. What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, this move to the REUL law, okay, which has now been passed with some amendments that took away some of the very worst aspects, okay, but the fact that law has been passed in the UK Parliament, and also this threat to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, it basically has the same motivation. It's simply the exploitation of anti-Europe feeling, which seems to exist much more so in England than it does in Scotland. Scotland has has always historic links with Europe. We've been friends with European countries. So I think it is something that's characteristic of more south of the border, that I think there always has been this anti-Europe feeling. Okay, I lived in England for a while, and I was quite surprised to discover the anti-Europe feeling amongst people. But obviously, that was whipped up by the Brexiters leading up to the 2016 election. They exploited that in order to get their Brexit through. Still being exploited by the Tories in order to get them back into government, or into government and staying in government. And Labour, of course, seem to be going along with it. I would just like to say, I mean, there is a claim that from the UK government, there is a claim that the law will be passed by the end of this year that will protect equal pay for women. But I mean, does anybody trust that? I wouldn't mind can I just say something about the human rights? Is that okay, Brian? Because I have
of course, please.
Okay, cheers. So, yeah, I think this is really important. I think an awful lot of people don't understand what Martyn just said, that, the ECHR, the Convention on Human Rights, was actually established in the 1950s, early 1950s. It's the way it operates and the way that the European Court of Human Rights operate, that's managed by the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe, which again has nothing to do with the EU. Well, it is a separate organisation, and there are now I had to check this, right, but there are 46 member countries of Council of Europe, and that includes basically all the EU countries and other countries around Europe. The one that the one in Europe that is not in the ECHR, not a member of not a member of the Council of Europe, and therefore not a signatory of the ECHR, is of course Belarus. So if UK withdraws from the ECHR, then we are we're akin to the kind of state that Belarus is. So it's extremely important, and there is a bill, a human rights bill for Scotland coming up soon in the Scottish Parliament. And Martyn will know more about this than I do. But my understanding is that it is a way of the Scottish Parliament or Scottish Government to try to protect us in Scotland from the worst of the UK government's plans for undermining human rights. I don't think they'll actually get away with it, with withdrawing from the ECHR. In reality, I don't think they'll get away with it. I think there'll be enough actually sensible people, maybe even sensible Tories who will oppose it. So I don't think they'll actually get away with it. But the fact that they threaten it is the serious thing. The way that they threaten that is a way of getting votes, and then even if they have to climb back down, even if there are lots of amendments or the bill doesn't get through or whatever, they've achieved something. They've created divisions, and got some more votes for themselves. But they might be wrong about that. I think they might find that actually public opinion. Actually, people do actually realise how important human rights are. I hope so.
Thank you, Morag. But I've heard a lot of people saying similar to what you've just said. There are a lot of talking heads in the media have said that it's an empty threat by the Tories to say that they want to leave the ECHR and that they would never do it, and it's just to throw red meat to the extreme wing of the party. But I remember being told the same thing about Brexit, that it would never happen, and yet here we are.
Yes. Hopefully we've learned. I mean, one thing about Brexit, if there's any good thing about it, it is a learning experience. There are so many things we need to learn about it. And I think in relation to what you've just said, one of the main things we've learned is that some people lied about the so-called benefits of Brexit. Lies were conveyed. And I think at that time we weren't, people were more trusting. We've lost trust now over the last few years, which is not a good thing. But on future governments, whether UK, Scotland, UK government especially, it's got a real job on its hand to try and recover trust. But we were lied to. Everybody was lied to leading up to Brexit. Of course, people voted for things that they were told were going to get better. There was going to be more money for the NHS. Food prices were going to come down. I mean, it's just crazy. So we were lied to, and so maybe we will have learned to be a bit more sceptical. So this plan to withdraw from the ECHR, maybe people will realise that it's not actually such a good idea.
Okay, thank you, Morag. And I sense that we might have to run over a wee bit on the time on this one. Martyn, I'm really keen to hear your perspective on this as somebody who, as an MP working in Westminster. So you're getting to talk to colleagues from different parties down there as well as within the SNP. Is there anything that you can tell us about are the Tories serious about when they want to leave the ECHR, and your colleagues' opinions?
Well, as I said earlier, some of them are xenophobic nut jobs, so some of them really are serious about this. I think the more sane ones realise that it's bonkers, but it's who wins out. And as you correctly pointed out before, we all thought Brexit was bonkers, and they still did that. So there's a real risk there. And if we just look at the other part of your original question about the EU retained law bill and the threat to equal pay, it highlights why we need control over workers' rights here in Scotland, because that is the area that's most under threat from this whole right-wing project. We need to take control and make sure we have that power at home here in Scotland.
Thank you, Martyn. So I will now move on to the next item, but I won't go through the Prime Minister's list of 5 priorities. It's bad enough having to listen to them the first time around. But I'll go on to the bottom line report, which said that Labour and the Conservatives have both been accused of being out of step with public concern about the cost of living crisis. As polling suggested, fewer than 1 in 4 people believed tackling it was a priority for the two parties. Policies that cut energy prices, raised the minimum wage and reduced housing costs proved more favourable to people polled than tax cuts. The YouGov poll conducted among 2,000 adults found, and yet tax cuts for the rich is what we tend to get. The report also came up with 2 measures or yardsticks, are supposed to be them examples of the common people. One was Workington Man. He's meant to be an older voter living in the north of England, and the other was Stevenage Woman. Stevenage Woman, let me give you her description, is a younger and more economically insecure suburban dweller. Martyn and Morag, I had never even heard of Workington, and I've heard of Stevenage. I lived in England for more than 20 years. I've heard of Stevenage, but I'd struggled to pinpoint it on a map. So Martyn, I'll come to you first. Can you relate to, or do you think that the description of Workington Man fits you? And if it does, or if it doesn't, why not? Or...
Well, I hope I'm not classed as an older man to start with, but I don't really go in for these kind of categorizations. I think my experience, irrespective of what age someone is or what their social background is most people are kind of aspirational about life. They want a good quality of life and a better quality of life, and they want to leave a better quality of life for their children and the people that come after them. So I think that's in a nutshell where we really need to be talking, and cost of living is just such an overriding factor. We've got amongst the highest inflation in mortgage prices and insurance prices across Europe. We've got food prices rocketing. We've got energy costs, despite the fact that we are an energy-rich country that basically could supply all of our energy needs through renewables. It's just absolutely absurd that we're living in a cost of living crisis that's not of our making, and we don't have the powers to address the problems and tackle it for ourselves. And I think that's the real battle.
Thank you, Martyn. And just quickly then, Morag, Stevenage Woman, how does she relate to you as somebody who living in Scotland? Does she fit the bill?
I'm going to be absolutely honest, Brian. I don't know. I haven't read the description of Stevenage Woman. However, I think what's interesting here, if I could just relate it to Scotland, actually. So Martyn just went through a whole list of things that could be done by the UK government to alleviate the situation, cost of living and so on. But in Scotland, obviously these are things where if we had the powers, we would be able to actually put in place better policies. At the moment, we just have to mitigate, don't we? And I think the Scottish Government is doing quite a good job of mitigating the harms. But why should our government in Scotland have to be putting so much money into mitigation? So I think something, this phrase, the cost of living crisis. People use that word, cost of living crisis. Use the word austerity, etc. I would actually prefer it if we talked about poverty, because it is poverty, and it's poverty that is being deliberately caused by the UK government, which is absolutely shocking. And I think really we need to get that message across that this is what's happening in the UK. Often you hear people, the charities are working overtime with food banks and so on to try and support people. And yet, very often, you don't hear people mention any sort of understanding that this is all happening because of UK government policy. So, I think that's part of the message we have to get out.
Thank you, Morag, for calling a spade. And of course, winter's approaching. My favourite season is just around the corner. And then soon after that winter, when people are going to start having to put the heating back up. So bills are going to be higher this year than last year, because despite them falling, there's currently no government support. So Stephen Flynn, the leader of the SNP party at Westminster, has challenged the UK government to reintroduce a £400 energy bill and rebate households from October. But more needs to be done, he says, to tackle the high cost of energy, rents and mortgages and food prices. So Martyn is a direct colleague of Mr Flynn. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, first up, he's absolutely right, and we need to put this into real perspective. I think we know that energy prices are a little lower than they were a few months ago, but standing charges are increasing, and it's predicted that average energy bills will be in excess of, per household, £2,000 a year by January. Now, that's £2,000 after people have paid their tax and their national insurance. They're also paying their mortgage, their rent, their food, and all of which has gone up. This is unaffordable, and there's I think it was the Citizens Advice Bureau did some stuff quite recently that suggested 1.3 million Scots are struggling to pay their bills, and the numbers looking at what to do about being unable to pay for their mortgages is more than doubled in terms of hits on their website. So people are really feeling the pinch, and this is something that the UK government could do to address a real problem. People can't not switch their heating on. They will literally face ill health, death, and a whole host of things if they don't adequately heat their homes. So it's not an option people have to skimp on that. They really have to have a basic level of heat. So we do need to do something, and it's a simple thing that the UK government could do to help address that. And it's the poorest people that are most affected. Not only do they have a higher proportion of their income eaten up in energy bills, they usually are living in houses that are less well insulated and have higher energy demands. So they're getting hit with a double whammy.
Thank you, Martyn. There was something I was going to say there, and it's gone right out of my brain. Morag, Stephen's woman, just by the way, she was a younger and more economically insecure suburban dweller. But I suppose my point was that this report is very much geared towards when it says the UK, I mean, basically it's England, isn't it? It doesn't really relate to Scotland specifically very much. And Labour don't come out much better than the Tories, and they would say that the reason for that is that they've got to think about they're going to be constrained by the financial and economic mess left by the Tory government from Liz Truss and co. But so from a Scottish perspective, what do you think needs to be done?
Brian, are we still on the same question about cost of living crisis?
Yeah, cost of living crisis. I suppose I'm thinking this report very much concentrates on the Tories and Labour in England, and how voters don't think that either of them can be trusted to get rid of the cost of living crisis. So maybe if there was a Scottish alternative, what that might look like?
Well, Scottish alternative is actually full powers, in other words, independence, and full powers for the Scottish Parliament. I mean, I know I'll probably be accused of saying, "Oh, you think that's the answer to everything." Well, actually, it is. Unfortunately, it's going to take several years, during which time the Scottish Government needs to do as much as it possibly can, use all the powers that it does have to try and mitigate the ill effects of the UK government policy. But I think it's often, I heard there was another poll which apparently was in the Times. I don't subscribe to the Times, so I haven't read it. But I saw the headline that Scottish people think the cost of living, it's more important to tackle the cost of living crisis and get independence. Well, that's, they've obviously been asked a daft question as if the two were not related at all. In order to solve the cost of living crisis, so-called, you have to get rid of the UK government, or in our case, become independent from them, so that we can actually have proper policies that will actually care for people. Because that's not happening now. People are not being cared for, and also, more fairness. We're talking about women's pay, etc. We want more fairness. We want a greener Scotland. It's all sorts of issues like why are new houses not all being built with solar panels and proper insulation and everything? It's maybe they're getting proper insulation on the new ones, but it's really difficult to get old places insulated. They need to. So basically, whatever the problems are, whether it's a climate crisis, whether it's poverty, whatever, the long-term answer, unfortunately long-term, wish it was shorter term, as soon as possible really, we need independence so that we've got full powers to tackle these things.
Thank you, Morag. And you did actually touch on something that I thought might come into the conversation or might make a question, which was about renewables and should any money to cut the cost of living be spent on insulating homes to make it bills more affordable. In Martyn, I remember the point that dropped out my brain, we're almost out of time, but it's that kind of like false economy where if people are unable to afford to heat their homes, then there's going to be more people getting flus and pneumonia and the like, so therefore hospital figures are going to rise over the winter, and to cut the NHS waiting list is one of Sunak's 5 priorities. So is there anything wrong with my logic there, do you think, just quickly?
No, your logic is absolutely perfect, and it highlights why we need joined up policy making in real time, and that only comes with independence. I mean, we have this stark reality that we have environmental powers and we have powers over the environment and heat, but we don't have energy. How can you tackle fuel poverty without all of that being joined up? It's you've got some of them on one hand but not on the other, so you've got to have them both to do it.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the next item, and I'll score that one out so I don't go to the wrong one again. So the Scottish Government's programme for government. The Scottish Parliament returns this coming week, and the First Minister, Humza Yousaf, will present his very first programme for government since becoming leader or First Minister. Mr Yousaf has said he wants to tackle poverty and grow the economy, but what else should be in the Scotland's programme for government? So, Martyn, as a SNP MP, I'll come to you first. What do you think is going to be in the announcement in the coming days?
Well, I'm
what would you like to
everyone
see?
else. Yeah, I'm like everyone else. I'm going to have to wait till Tuesday to find out what is in the announcement. I look forward to hearing it. I think that general position of focusing on poverty and growing the economy pretty much covers just about anything that we want to do, and it will be Humza's opportunity to really stamp his mark on the new government. And I think this is a landmark event that those of us in the independence movement need to be amplifying quite strongly next week to cut through some of the hostility we will get in the mainstream media, because it will be a stall set out for how we can do things better with the powers we have, and I'm quite sure it will also highlight how if we had additional powers we could do so much better. So I look forward to that. I mean, I think we've already seen the sense of direction that Humza's now leading in. He's appointed the first ever independence minister, so I think these points will be made, and I certainly look forward to hearing what he says on Tuesday. And it is, as I say, a chance for us to amplify a good positive message for how things can be done differently and better, and a fresh start with the new team that are running the country.
Thank you, Martyn. Morag, I'm guessing that maybe you would like to see something to do with the European Union, but perhaps high up in his list of priorities, or maybe independence itself. What would be on your list?
Well, certainly a number of the things that we've already talked about really should be top priority. For example, poverty. As far as the economy is concerned, I would say the focus needs to be on well-being economy, and there's been quite a few papers published about this as an economy that actually puts people at the centre, their well-being at the centre, rather than simply GDP or some measure like that. So other things, well, yes, green measures need to be bumped up and enforced, and land reform is another important thing. There are so many things, and Martyn, I'm sure he's got his finger on the pulse there. But yes, we do want independence to be front and centre. And I think actually Humza made a good start, in that first speech he made, or first Minister questions that he did, where he said, yes, it's all about independence. And the opposition go on and say, oh, you just go on about independence. And he said, more or less, yeah, too right. I am going to talk about independence because that is top priority. Obviously, yes. As far as Europe is concerned, it is absolutely essential that the Butte House Agreement is continued. There's been quite a lot of reports in mostly right-wing press saying that there are cracks in this agreement and so on. It's absolutely essential, that along with independence, we are preparing to apply to join the EU. So the Scottish Government at the moment can actually be and is, I think, making those preparations, not just for independence, but for applying to the EU. And it's important to get, well, what we try to do in our group, obviously, S3U, we try to share information because there's not enough information out there. So, for example, in applying to join the EU, you can quite quickly get an association agreement before your candidacy is even approved, right? Sorry, take that back. Not before your candidacy is approved, but on the way to getting your candidacy approved, you can get an association agreement which actually confers certain benefits, and that's quite quick. That can happen quite quickly. These things, we have to prepare these things. I think there's still a few people who don't want to join the EU once we're independent. Or some people are suggesting alternatives. None of them are as beneficial as actually being in the EU. And so, yes, I want that to be absolutely a top priority. The preparations to joining the EU once we're independent.
Thanks, Morag. And you mentioned the Butte House agreement between the SNP and the Greens in Holyrood. And one of the first things that the First Minister said when he took office was that he thought that agreement with the Greens was worth its weight in gold. Another thing that he did very early on in his tenancy when he became First Minister was he started to reboot the government's relationship with local authorities and business. So, Martyn, I'm wondering if, I don't know, have out of the two, the Butte House agreement, there aren't any Green Scottish MPs in Westminster or local authorities and businesses in the First Minister. Is there anything that you'd like to be able to say there, or give us any gossip from Westminster about what the word is?
Well, I don't think we've got any real gossip from Westminster as to what the Scottish programme for government will be, but one area that definitely impacts upon that is protecting public services. And a message that has to, in my opinion, come across is that all the good work that the Scottish Government does to protect public services, it cannot just continue writing a blank cheque to mitigate the worst excesses of Westminster. And that is a stark reality that we need to hammer home. So I hope that message comes out loud and clearly next week.
Thank you, Martyn. So we've got a couple of minutes. I'm going to move on to the next item, though, because I think there'll be a lot to say about this. So yesterday's independence rally in Edinburgh, Hamza Yousaf headlined the Believe in Scotland, Yes for EU march for an independent Scotland within the EU in Edinburgh yesterday. It was the weather was immaculate. It was incredibly perfect weather. Organisers believed that there were 25,000 people on the march. There were speakers from EU countries who told the crowd that they felt an independent Scotland would be welcomed back into the EU. But I could go on. The speakers included Leslie Riddick, Jamie Hepburn, the Minister for Independence, Morag, Yes for EU. Obviously, you were there. Morag, maybe just go to you, Morag. Maybe can you tell us something about how that came about? So your organisation teamed up with Believe in Scotland. How did that happen? Oh, I think have you muted yourself there? Perhaps, Morag, we can't hear you. Shall I come to you, Martyn? Martyn,
Oh, sorry, I've got it.
Oh, there you go. Sorry.
My finger slipped. Yeah, sorry about that. So the first thing I want to say is it was fantastic that 25,000 people estimated. That was a police estimate, by the way, not just not just us. So it was fantastic. So thanks to everybody who came along. That it was just fabulous. Right. Okay. So how did it come about? So we had actually planned an event over a year ago. We started planning, and the Yes3U vice convener Sam Page, she actually put in an application to the council over a year ago to get permission to hold a march. Normally our events are fairly modest. So the last big rally we had was about, I think, 300 people. last year. So then when we were already collaborating with Believe in Scotland, we're an affiliated group to Believe in Scotland and so on. We already were working with that organisation. And then somebody suggested, and I don't remember exactly how, but somebody suggested, why not join forces and make this into a big event? So the application had already gone in, and so the groundwork had been laid. So yeah, and then over several months, we just worked together closely, had regular meetings. Our SVU team had regular meetings with the Believe in Scotland team, and it came together, and we divided up roles of how we were organising it. Yeah, it worked out pretty well. I think one of the main things that worked really well yesterday was the management of the volunteers and stewards. So we had 80 people recruited. Originally came down to about 50 or 60. Some people had COVID on the day. That was really a bit of a shame, and we're hearing that they're okay. But anyway, we had they were all organised into teams, and a lot of the stewards were experienced, had been on big marches before, and they basically said they found it to be very, very well organised. So we're very proud of that, and it's our secretary, David Spacey, who was mainly in charge of that. So thank goodness. Other two members of the team, I might as well just name check them all. Elise Talleyrand, she was a lead steward and did loads of work. Also, Leslie Stark, who does lots of fantastic social media stuff, and another member, Peter Glissoff, he was one who came down with COVID. But anyway, it was really good teamwork. That's what I'm trying to emphasise. Very good teamwork on our part and on Believe in Scotland part, and we worked together. We learned a lot of lessons. Not everything went smoothly. But and I think the feeling of the day was that it was very positive, and people want more.
Thank you, Morag. And I think Brian Cox also came down with COVID and wasn't able to attend. And I should say congratulations to you and to Believe in Scotland for pulling off such a wonderful day. Also, there's been it's kind of a change in format from the old AUOB banners. It was Alistair Heather and Kelly Given were hosting it, and they gave it a very young and fresh sort of gender balanced look, which was good. But Martyn, did you manage to get along? Broadcasting Scotland was there, by the way, so if you have a look on our YouTube channel, then you can see that we covered the speeches and part of the march.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I definitely got along, and I picked up one of your flyers as well, which I think was good to see the team out distributing those in the crowd. I was also very impressed with what I saw on the day. I don't attend every march that's going, because I'd rather get out chapping doors, but I do try and get along to a few of them, particularly if they're relatively close to my area or they're at, I think, significant points in our movement's development. And I think this was one of those points. We had to show people that we were alive and kicking and out there in good numbers, and you can only imagine how much sort of a stronger presence we'd have had we not had a COVID wave depressing our numbers a bit. But it was a very credible turnout. It was a very good balanced list of speakers, and it wasn't too many speakers. It was all credible, high level stuff. So I think full marks to the organisers and the enthusiasm that comes out. Now, as I said earlier there, I would rather we had loads of folk out chapping doors and converting people one at a time and persuading them, but not everybody can do that. And if we can get things that bring the movement together, boost the morale, allow everyone to share photos and positive messages, it all helps contribute to that gradual development of our growth and support. And yesterday's event did that, I think, in a good way. So let's hope the next major event has an equal impact, and I look forward to seeing what the Freedom Chain does in October, because that goes through my constituency and is again something a bit different. And we have to hope we can emulate the mass freedom chain that India had during Gandhi's movement, because all these things have been done before. There are no new ideas. We just have to get new enthusiasm and energy, and that's the bit that all of us on the ground can do.
thank you, Martyn. And the setting was perfect as well. I mean, it really was a beautiful day. Morag, I was looking on social media in the run-up to the rally, and I saw Chris McElhaney of Alapa was tweeting that It's not a march, he said. It's a rally for independence. It's not a march and rally for independence. It's a march and rally for an independent Scotland. It's in the EU, a European Union that I and hundreds of thousands of fellow independence supporters do not think an independent Scotland should seek to join. Would you want maybe, he's not here to have a right to reply today, but would you maybe want to address that?
Well, there's several polls recently have shown that over 70% of Scots want to be in the EU. So I don't know where he got his figures from, but you know, I'm looking at good reputable polls which say 72%, 75% want to be in the EU. Well, what our job as grassroots activists out on the street, we're often explaining the basics, which part of which is that the UK, there are no signs the UK is going to join, even if Labour gets in at the UK general election next year. They're just mirroring Tory policies. They're saying they won't even try to rejoin the single market or anything like that. I mean, Scottish people know now. We know how damaging Brexit has been to us. We're experiencing that. You know, the businesses that Martyn was talking about, food and drink, our a lot of our main important parts of our economy are suffering. Scottish people know how they're suffering, how we are suffering. They know that their youngsters are they're not getting the benefits of freedom of movement. They're not getting the benefits of Erasmus. My sons, who are obviously grown up, they benefited from Erasmus. They worked abroad, they studied abroad, and quite a lot of our members of my generation are in the same position. They've got grown-up children who benefited tremendously from it. And that's a benefit to our society as well. It's a benefit to our culture. The young folk that go abroad and they learn and they work and they get experience, and hopefully they come back and we get the benefit of it. Or maybe they stay abroad like one of my lads. But I want my grandchildren and my grandchildren's generation to have the benefits that my kids had. So I mean, it's everyone can see now, and the hassle when you travel abroad, the massive queues, and you have to go through the non-EU passports, and roaming charges. We know the damage of Brexit. So I'm sure that increasing numbers of Scots realise what a mistake the UK Tory Brexit was. Or Tory and Labour Brexit, as it happens now. There are critics, and feel free to disapprove of the EU, but I would say actually the EU has changed a lot for the better over recent years. People might contradict me on that, but they have become more democratic, and they have actually learned to respond to big crises much more effectively. They didn't respond well to the Greek crisis some years ago, but they have actually responded quite well to immigration crisis and certainly the pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine. So, and it's just important to be part of a global bloc these days. The world is more insecure, and we can play our part in Europe. We can be a valued member of Europe. I think a lot of Europeans, like Claude, the French speaker, said yesterday, they realise just what we can bring, the value that Scotland can bring. They can see that the values that we hold in terms of social justice and fairness and so on, they can see that, and democracy and the rule of law, all these things which are undermined by the UK government. People in Europe can see that Scotland is doing its best to adhere to those, and that those are our own traditional values too.
Thank you, Morag. And so, Martyn, similarly, also Morag, I would maybe even hazard to add the fact that the earlier item where we talked about how Britain is not protecting its borders since Brexit is maybe another bit of that jigsaw puzzle. But Martyn, people like Mr McElhaney, who maybe are pro-independent supporters, but they might have stayed away because of the EU element. And I'm also minded that we're also hearing a lot of people saying that we need to vote Labour now to kind of get rid of the Tory government in Westminster, because that's more important than independence. Do you think these putting things in front of before we all get together and vote for independence is wise?
Well, we'll never please everyone on every issue. There will always be a range of views, and in any democracy, a range of views is actually healthy. But what we have to recognise is the underlying trend in Scotland is the overwhelming majority of Scottish people of all political persuasions and opinions want to be back in Europe. So any independent Scotland's future rests with being back in Europe, and that's just the democratic reality. So while it's helpful to have a debate and to look at all the options and make sure people know what we're all talking about and the benefits, we've got to face the facts that the vast majority of people want back in Europe, and that is the ground that we will win additional converts to independence on. I'm quite convinced of that.
Thank you, Martyn. Morag, just another thing that was in my mind, the pipe band, Soar Alba, was there yesterday, and they played a poignant tribute to the Yes biker Alexander, or Sandy McCracken, who died in a crash while he was travelling to take part in an All Under One Banner march in Skye last month, and that just made me think that why wasn't there maybe a bigger presence at yesterday's rally from the indie bikers? Because I don't know about everybody else, but I kind of missed them.
Yeah, I think a lot of people miss them actually, Brian, and I'm glad you asked me that, because I heard a rumour that, we had just said no, we weren't going to have them, and that's just not true. We did, for some time, there were plans for them to take part, but actually it was quite difficult because we were anticipating big numbers, it was quite difficult to negotiate a route for them to do a drive past. The Horsewind had to be closed because of the expected march and the expected numbers and so on, and that would have been their traditional route in the end. And Queen's Drive, of course, had to be closed as well. So in the end, there wasn't going to be a suitable route that would work for the rally and would also work for the bikers. And they wrote to us and basically said that they were disappointed, but couldn't come to an agreed position. But they wrote to us, and then there were representatives on the march as well. There were, with the Yes Bikers banner on the march. And then, of course, Sir Alba Pipes and Drums played played that lament, which was a tribute to the biker who died. I mean, really, I think yesterday was a situation where we were reaching out to people, and I think it did feel quite unifying. I know that there were Labour supporters there. There were some Alba supporters there. There were other groups, I won't name them, but other groups that you might not have expected to join a rally for independence in the EU. And I think basically they were there, even if they didn't agree with the EU part, they were there because they want independence, and that is the top priority.
Thank you, Morag, for that clarification. That's really good to know. I'm going to maybe be cheeky and steal a couple of minutes of your time of your Sunday afternoons, if you don't mind, because this is a question that I think both of you could answer first. But also, similar to, I saw criticism of the event yesterday. Some people were saying it was an SNP rally. Martyn, you're an SNP MP, but Morag, you're one of the organisers. Again, this is that kind of strange section of people that are for independence, but they maybe would stay away because it was an SNP rally. Morag, where's that coming from, do you think? Or is that a valid...
It was news to me that we were being funded by the SNP. That's just absurd. It's just not true. It's just not true. And it's absolutely not true. Some claims have been made that it was manipulated. It was all totally under the control of the SNP. It's just not true. And I know that from working on the inside for months with my team, with Believe in Scotland. We organised it, we did it the way that we wanted to do it. I mean, the people that are making those claims, I'm not sure why they're making those claims, that it's all SNP dominated or something, Really, I thought yesterday it was a yes movement coming to the fore. And we were delighted, obviously, that we got 3 government ministers speaking. That was absolutely fantastic. So it felt to me like this was a big event of the yes movement, people coming together, and including the political parties. who are the people in government and can. They do have the powers to pass laws and so on. These are the people who are in power in Scotland. And as long as they're putting forward policies of independence and EU membership, in my group's case, as long as they're putting forward those policies, yes, they will be supported. So I think some yesers just want to totally exclude political parties, but I think we all have to work together. We are all yes activists.
Thank you, Morag. And Martyn, we are out of time, so are you happy to let Morag have the last word, or is there anything else that you'd like to say? Maybe were you offended that you weren't asked to speak at the rally?
No, I'm always quite happy to go along and soak up the atmosphere. I've spoken at other rallies in the past, and I think it would be hard to top the list of cross-party speakers that they did have, especially being topped up by the First Minister himself. So that's all indicates that it was a cross-party event. It was very well attended by parliamentarians from both parliaments. That may reflect the fact that it was the last weekend of the recess before both parliaments return, and people were available in a way that maybe they wouldn't be at other events and rallies. But it was a very encouraging coming together of the wider movement.
Thank you, Martyn. Thank you, Morag. I hope you're okay after your first visit here to Broadcasting Scotland, and you'll come back again. Thank you, Martyn.
Okay, Brian, thanks.
Yeah, great. And I'll let you get back to your what's left of the weekend and the end of recess. But thank you, Martyn. Thank you, Morag. So that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we do depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. You do know that our programmes will always be free to view, but if you could afford £5 per month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. However, the generosity of our supporters so far has given us a little more. We have raised over £16,000 so far and will be able to continue making programmes for now. But our need to raise the remaining £14,000 is still really urgent. So please help if you can. So once again, thank you to our guests, to Morag and to Martyn. We'll see you again. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.